first of all, let me thank you for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you on. I've been a fan of the crazy stuff I see you do in the periphery. I first discovered you, obviously, through Kate, who I knew first. But I got really excited within the last few years, especially when I saw that you guys did that partnership for GLOB, which was both wrestling and burlesque, which was really cool because I'm more in the burlesque scene. But to start, you've been wrestling a long time, right? You're not new to the scene. You've been around a while, yeah?
Yes. I have been performing under the hood of Ophidian The Cobra since 2007. My first match in professional wrestling was 2006. So I've got 13 years in professional wrestling.
Wow. And have you always loved wrestling? Like, did you grow up watching the old timers on the TV?
I did grow up watching the old timers. This definitely was a thing that I experienced growing up with my father, watching professional wrestling. Like, I don't remember a time when wrestling wasn't in my life. You know, in that sense, like, I think, especially in the Spanish households that I grew up in, every single family member of mine, my cousins, you know, my uncles, my aunts, we all watched wrestling in some form of another, whether it was WWF or AAA or CMML on Telemundo. You know, wrestling was always a part of my family. And growing up in the Philadelphia area, which I can get into in a moment, kind of really nailed that down.
Sure. I would imagine so. And did you have a favorite wrestler growing up or even in your teen years? Like, was there, like, a wrestler that you loved more than the others?
If you spoke to me as a young child, like, you know, I would say pre-teen years, without a doubt, The Undertaker. 'Cause there's a specific moment I remember in professional wrestling when, you know, I've watched it, but, like, the moment that hooked me, was The Undertaker versus The Undertaker at SummerSlam.
I remember that, yeah.
And when those two went face to face, it blew my young mind. You know, just seeing The Undertaker, who I loved in that, and some of the other stuff, like his build up with the Ultimate Warrior, where, like, you know, he was kind of putting people in body bags and putting them, you know, like burning them alive in his whatever the place you take dead people to. I forget what it's called at the moment. You know, and just seeing all these The Undertaker do all these different things that were in character. You know, because Undertaker was always fully gimmicked to the core.
Of course, yeah.
So watching another Undertaker, thinking that there was another person out in the world that had these mystical powers that the Undertaker had, just blew my mind and had me hooked from that moment on. Post preteens, you know, growing up in an ECW and CZW world, enjoying some of the, you know, like the edgy alternative hardcore stuff.
Sure.
You know, I loved RVD and the Luchadors. You know, Mysterio and Psychosis and Juventud.
Yeah, I remember, like, so it's funny. So, like, I grew up a goth kid in the 90s, and so, like, of course I loved The Undertaker, like, the theatricality and, like, even beyond when, you know, he was, like, the Lord of Darkness with Paul Bearer, and then, of course, the Hell in the Cell with Mankind. Like, growing up in that era of wrestling, I don't watch as much of it now, but, like, growing up during that era, there was just so much ridiculous shit that you could find on TV and online. And then you mentioned ECW. Like, I loved Tommy Dreamer. I loved the idea of this wrestler who was just no business, no frills, just came out and put people down.
Absolutely.
And you couldn't not be hyped. And then for him to go against guys like Rob Van Dam, who was just like a cartoon character, like moved in a way that I didn't think another human could move.
There was something about the way that ECW introduced the high flyers that made them feel different from anything, you know, NWA or WWF or WCW was doing with those types of performers. The way that they highlighted them and kind of took the leash off of every single one of them gave us something that I don't think we'll ever really be able to repeat as far as, like, performances go. You know, there's some really cool stuff that exists now between guys like Ricochet and Will Ospreay. You know, when you see that kind of stuff for guys like Phoenix and Penta right now, who are doing some really cool stuff, some really innovative stuff on the indie scene. But there was just magic that happened in that time period that we're only starting to kind of feel again in the scene.
Yeah, there was a level of theatricality that I always loved about the WWE when it was still the WWF. Like, I was one of the few people who was actually a Gangrel fan. Because, like, of course, like I said, goth kid in the 90s, so grew up loving
They
it.
had one of the greatest theme songs of all time.
Yeah, and
The Brood.
and
The music was so good.
yeah, the Brood's music was so good. Their entrance with the Ring of Fire. I remember that whatever the first video game they were featured in that I got, that they had that entrance in a video game. I was like, this is amazing. You know, like there was something about that era, like the Attitude Era, a little bit before and a little bit after, where like anything goes. Like they had the Hurricane, and you know, of course, the Rock, and like all of these larger than life characters. Some who are just all attitude, and then tons of other characters who had these ridiculous gimmicks, like Al Snow and the head. It captured my imagination in a way that comic books and video games did as well, because of just how over the top it was.
That's absolutely what drew me into professional wrestling. The theatricality of it. I love the over the top characters that exist in the world of professional wrestling. Being one myself.
Sure, and so let's talk about you a little bit. And of course, as Ophidian the Cobra, Ophidian the Ouroboros, you wear a Cobra luchador mask. And you're always masked, no matter what. There are no images of you without the mask. It's part of the culture. Growing up watching Rey Mysterio, like even though I'm not a super familiar with luchadors, I feel like I have a Cliff Notes version of it because of the things that he did, and that how he did eventually get unmasked. And it was this huge thing, and the community was in an uproar because it went against everything. And so, like, talk a little bit about your inspiration for pursuing wrestling and what made you really want to go the path of a luchador and be masked and always wear a mask.
I mentioned this slightly earlier about growing up in the Philadelphia area. There is, at least when I was growing up, no better place to enjoy professional wrestling than in South Philadelphia. You know, it's truly the epicenter for professional wrestling, the ECW arena. Growing up, I would go to CZW shows, Ring of Honor shows. I just got the chance to see IWA Mid-South at the arena, Velocity Pro, Chikara, right, all these independent companies in this area. And even before that, when I was in high school, before I was really kind of sneaking out to go to wrestling shows on my own, we had WGTV 48, or sometimes Channel 18, where I grew up at in Jersey, that had it, 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, NWA Wildside, Fake U TV, which was CZW's, like late night television show, ECW, Women's Extreme Wrestling, right? You had all these different companies coming on at midnight every night of the week. I was just bombarded with independent, underground professional wrestling. And that was really only in this area, in Philadelphia. And so while WWE made me a professional wrestling fan, made me love pro wrestling, the independent scene, going to the arena as a young adult, made me want to be a professional wrestler. Being in that environment was intoxicating. It drove me to want to cross the barrier and get in the ring. I could interact, I could talk to, I could touch these performers month in and month out and watch them so closely at that arena. It felt like I was a part of something that I couldn't replicate anywhere else in my life. So not only, kind of being in that environment, but then also having access to the wrestling school that was in the ECW arena. So I got my start training inside the ECW arena, and being able to train at a venue, where guys like RVD and Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko and Benoit and Guerrero and Mysterio and all these dudes trained at and performed at, performed at, they all didn't train there, was something I couldn't turn down. Growing up in this area, having the ability to train at that building under the likes of Cesaro, who at the time was Claudio Castagnoli, Cassius Ono, who was Chris Hero at the time, both of which work for the WWE now, and Mike Quackenbush, who was one of the trainers in the Performance Center, who runs Chikara as well. He's one of the only trainers that works there, but also still has his own wrestling school outside of the WWE. So getting to train under all these guys and still, was something that I think has forever changed my life and set me down a path I could never turn away from. going the route of a masked performer was not what I expected when I got into professional wrestling. It wasn't the first thought, and not because I didn't enjoy the mask, I didn't want to be a part of the mask, but we all have these crazy, grandiose ideas on what we're going to be when we're young.
Sure.
You know? Whether it's going to be a face-painted, goth character. Like, I called myself the Angel of Death low-key when I backyarded. I called myself, Little Shank as a backyarder. I called myself Bloodhem. I called myself, Lucky Pierre. I had all these different crazy names, as a kid, backyarding with your friends before I got into professional wrestling. And it wasn't until I started training and learning from these guys that I really understood the performance aspect of professional wrestling. When you watch a movie, you listen to music, any kind of entertainment that you're offered that you choose to consume, you don't always look under the hood to see what makes it work and why it works. If it's done really well, if it's good art, if it's quality entertainment, you don't think about those things. And I looked at professional wrestling in that way. I loved it, and I wanted to know the mechanics, but more so the physical mechanics behind it, like how to do a backflip, how to fly off the top rope kind of stuff. I never really sat back and learned how to consume the entertainment aspect of it and the things that revolve around that until I started training. And then once I got that understanding and really learned to appreciate the theatricality behind pro wrestling, that's when I wanted to go the route of a mask.
And what is it about the Cobra that you identify with? What about that symbol and that being that really you're connected to?
I like wearing a mask to me, right, helps cloak the performer underneath. I hope that when you watch me, when I'm performing, the thought of the human that is wearing the hood never comes in your mind. Mm-hmm. You don't wonder, who is that guy that's wearing the Ophidian mask, or why you choose to do that while performing. And I think the ability to embody a cobra kind of helped me, was an animal that could help me hide who I was underneath. Mm. I took martial arts most of my life. I took Goju Ryu, Taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 11 years. The kind of different martial arts throughout my life, and still do train in martial arts now, a little less than I used to because professional wrestling kind of consumes most of my time, but I still try to spend some of my days here and there training in martial arts to kind of keep up with things I've learned in my life. And being a big fan of old school kung fu films, I wanted to go the route of an animal type, and I thought Snake was always one that stuck out to me as underutilized and underrepresented in the world of entertainment. And it's just so much fun. It's just a blast. I don't have to fake it. It is who I am and what I am.
Right.
From my flexibility to my movements in the ring, from my martial arts background, it's not something I have to fake. I am Ophidian. Which Ophidian, if you don't know, means snake-like. Mm-hmm. The definition of Ophidian, which is very much me.
Let's talk a little bit about your costumes, your masks, and your outfits. Of course, for those who don't know, they are made by the incredible Kate Nyx, who has her own wrestling costuming company. Was she making costumes for you before the company existed, or did her working for you specifically in helping you create these costumes lead to creating her own design company?
This is one of the things that I think really brought us together as a couple. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are lots of things in our lives that we were able to communicate with, that crossover between burlesque and pro wrestling, and what it means to entertain, and how both are similar, and how we entertain an audience kind of drew us together in the way that we can communicate on that level, and as well as on a personal level, and then the ability to help each other grow on a business level as well. So we saw the ability to kind of create a business partnership with our different disciplines. Kate's always been a seamstress her whole life. She grew up in the seamstress community. Her mother worked at a theater, so she's been working in theater since she was, a young child. She's always had that job. So when we started performing together, dating, and I got into a situation where one of my gear makers fell through before a very, very important angle. I turned to her desperately to make me a set of gear that the gear maker could not. So she made what I refer to as my ghost Ophidian, my old like kung fu master Ophidian. It was like a full white set of gear, where I had like an old kung fu robe that I wore out to the ring. I had just died in Chikara. I was put into a sarcophagus and buried alive, and what came out was essentially an undead version of me. And she created that first set of gear for me. And then from kind of then on, it snowballed into, oh, you made that set of gear for him. Well, we can make the set of gear for one of my students, and then another student. And then before we knew it, Kate was making gear full time for pro wrestling. And lucky enough, she's, throughout that, I've learned how to sew as well. So while she originally made all of my costumes, I learned how to make costumes with her as well, and now I make all my own masks. So anything you see now, at least within the last 2 years, has been made by me.
That's awesome.
But under her tutelage, of course.
Of course. That's really cool. That's really awesome, this idea that how the two of you influence each other. And it's funny, talking about burlesque and wrestling running in the same circles. Like, I've been DJing in burlesque for almost 7 years, and I've been hosting for the last 3. And, like, it wasn't until Glow happened on Netflix, and then like seeing things like GLOB and Tasselmania and going, oh my god, they are the same. Like, there are differences, but the theatricality level, there can be, if you want it to be, no difference, which I thought was really fascinating.
There's a concept in burlesque that I'm sure you know, but maybe for people listening that don't, is the tension and tease, right?
Right.
Like the idea that you're teasing the audience and building up tension throughout the performance for the end reveal. In professional wrestling, we do the same exact thing. We just don't call it, tease or tension, right? We are building to a specific pop in a match, right? A specific audience reaction, and we tease the audience by demonstrating athletic maneuvers early in the match and kind of giving them the idea of what they could expect later in the match when the fireworks really go off, right? When we get the reaction we want. And just as a burlesque performance, the big reveal, the declothing, is the same idea. We're just taking two different paths to get to the same exact end result, and we're using different terminology to get there. But same exact format, same structure to our performances.
For those who don't know, who haven't seen, I keep mentioning GLOB, which is the gorgeous Ladies of Burlesque, which was a burlesque and wrestling show where there were burlesque performers I know who were actually in the ring with you guys. What was that like to kind of curate that kind of joint companionship in the ring between two arts that are similar and like create that event?
Man, so I first met Kate in 2008 at a burlesque wrestling event called a Squared Circle Review. So it was a show that had it was a sideshow, like an old-timey circus, like a 1930s circus-themed professional wrestling event that had, cabaret and fire breathers and aerial stuff and like lyra, stuff like that. And that always kind of inspired me. Like, this is a cool idea. This to me is what professional wrestling can eventually turn into, a variety show. I've heard the term a gonzo variety show when describing this style of entertainment. And like that was kind of like my first taste, not only of the independence as a whole outside of Philadelphia, kind of seeing what the rest of the country is doing, what could be done with the independent scene. This is 2008, and being able to do that show every single year from 2008 till about 2013 kind of gave Kate and I a really strong foundation of what a professional wrestling burlesque, variety show could look like. So when kind of figuring out what we wanted to do on our own, we realized that the thing that was missing from that show was the interaction between the acts.
Right.
Like they were all just separate pieces being presented as opposed to, one cohesive unit, one cohesive story or through line throughout the show. And we knew we wanted to do that, given that that's what we felt was missing from that form of entertainment, that form of show. So when asking any of the burlesque dancers to get into a professional wrestling ring and to utilize the environment, right? We're kind of run the ropes, take a fall if you want, do a flip off of the, throughout the environment. You could tell it was very taxing, just both mentally and physically on them. Even nothing more so than for no one more so than Kate and Miss Liberty. Miss Liberty Rose, streamed our training sessions out of the Wrestle Factory, so we can kind of show the world that they were actually training to become professional wrestlers for the show. And then the weeks leading up to it, I got to work with all the girls individually. Some came down from New York or from other parts of from Baltimore to come train, to spend a day training with me to learn the ring so they could build custom acts for the environment. And that, without a doubt, was probably the most satisfying aspect of the whole experience, is watching their brains light up with ideas once they learned how they could use the environment, and that they were free to do whatever they wanted, in a space, in a way that a traditional stage would never allow them to express themselves. That was, without a doubt, a very gratifying experience.
Yeah, it was really cool as just a spectator, because I couldn't make it to Philly for the show for whatever reason, probably doing something not nearly as cool. I saw the videos of like Bunny and Schaefer, who I know really well, taking bumps and just being so giddy about it. And even though it was clearly taxing and a lot of work, like just ready to do whatever, was, as someone who grew up watching wrestling, and though I don't watch it as much now, I did do some very amateur, not very good backyard wrestling. Like, I got to live vicariously through them, seeing those kinds of things, which I thought were really cool, because if you're any kind of nerd about any of that stuff, it's just fun to kind of get behind the scenes and see how that stuff happens, There's something really satisfying about watching people play in an environment that are clearly really enjoying each other's company and collaborating.
The collaboration is really the best part about doing variety shows, is that you get to see these other people who view art through a different lens, and then going, all right, I want to view art through the lens that you do, so I can not only better understand what it is that I'm doing through the eyes of somebody else, but then create something I would have never thought of otherwise. And GLOB was, to me, something like this theatrical presentation of pro wrestling through the lens of burlesque is something that I think is completely unique to what we did that night. I don't think there's anything else that has been made like it before or after.
And that actually leads me to ask my next question, which is, besides obviously burlesque, which we've talked about quite a bit at this point, is there any other medium that you've pulled from that inspires Ophidian, or stuff you've done in ring, or stuff for storylines, or way you've cut promos? Like, have you pulled from any other media or entertainment for that?
So I've gotten a little bit of flack for this, but I've also gotten the opposite end of it. Kind of an understanding of why I say this, but there's a phrase that I like to throw around, and that is talent borrows and genius steals. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say you should steal from within your own art form. You shouldn't. If it already exists in your art form, you should, look someplace else, create something new. And I don't mean the commonalities that we all use, like the specific, like for example, pro wrestling, we all throw body slams, right? So you're not really stealing a body slam from somebody, because that's a common piece of vocabulary that everybody in the industry is allowed to use. I don't mean that kind of stuff. I mean, the more elaborate and very specific things. But talent borrows and genius steals. We're a culmination. Every single person in the world of our life experiences. We say the things we do. We perform the things that we do, right? We seek out the things that we do because of the way that we've experienced life. We're pulling from our past experiences to influence what we're going to do today, tomorrow, or, a week from now. And I feel that should be the same way with the way that we perform. We perform a specific way because of our life influences, and we shouldn't deny those things, right? Deny those urges or deny those influences. So I absolutely seek out what's brought me to the dance, essentially, through pop culture. Specifically things like Five Deadly Venoms, which is a Shaw Brothers film. Really all the Shaw Brothers movies, because I'm a huge Shaw Brothers fan. But that movie specifically, Five Deadly Venoms, number 2 was the Master of Snake style. He was known as the Snake Spirit. Which is where I got the tag name Snake Spirit from, and where a lot of my basic movements came from. For more modern day martial arts, I love Tony Jaa films and The Protector. I've legit straight up taken specific movements from the way he throws his kicks and the way he throws his knee attacks from his Muay Thai martial arts style and incorporated it into professional wrestling. And I feel that's valid, and that's very important to look at, because those things aren't being used in the world of professional wrestling. I can look at professional wrestling through the eyes of old school martial arts films and go, okay, these things work in the martial arts environment. These types of stories, these tropes, these movements, the vocabulary that they're speaking in these films, I can take over and bring into professional wrestling, and it'll be fresh, it'll be new, because it's not something being utilized in that environment, in that art form. So, talent borrows, genius steals. I do steal a lot from other things that I enjoy in life, specific martial arts films, and of course, there's no denying that G.I. Joe's Serpentor had a huge influence on the way that I sound when I'm performing and cutting promos, as well as various other things like some of my love of old school exploitation films and my love of horror.
Sure. I mean, and I totally get that. I mean, like I said, I've been a fan at a distance for a long time, just knowing you peripherally through Kate. But when Kate posted the video about helping you cut a promo on her YouTube channel, that's what inspired me to reach out, because, like, it's just the little things that you guys talked about how you record and the way you run the promos and the way you talk, and then hearing the final product. Like, it brought me back to a golden age of wrestling that I loved. And not to say wrestling now isn't as good, because I don't watch it, so I can't really speak to that. But it was very reminiscent of your promos of, like, these ridiculous characters. Like, if you watch any Ultimate Warrior promo now, like, it's no wonder the guy went nuts, or people think he went nuts, or whatever, because, like, he was just so over the top regardless. And, like, the Mean Gene days,
Oh yeah. My favorite is the Macho Man. He was practically an amateur magician, where he would just make props appear from out of nowhere in his promos. Trash cans and little creamers and all types of newspapers. He was just so good at it.
Yeah, and I loved that stuff. And, like, or, even in the Attitude era, like, every time The Rock cut a promo, you were waiting for "It Doesn't Matter," or, any of that stuff. And, like,
he was so good at the call and response that is kind of, I'm not saying lacking from a lot of entertainment now in the way that we present it, and allowing the audience to have that say in the way that we perform, that allowing that immediate feedback so that we can ad-lib and work on the fly with them. There's so much fun to be had there, that you get a guy like The Rock who's really good at doing so. A lot of his catchphrases was made up not on the fly, but kind of became something because of his allowance of the audience to have say in what he was doing in his performance.
Yeah, I'll never forget when Hulk Hogan made his return to the WWE. I can't remember what year it was, but I think it was after WCW was gone. And he was fighting The Rock in a main event, and I got to watch the audience make the heel turn for The Rock. They were cheering Hulk and booing The Rock. Like, and he was NWO at the time. Like, he was not supposed to be a face in that match, but the audience was so excited that he was back that they made him a face because of how that live crowd reacted. And it's just a thing I don't think I've ever seen in any other medium, where the audience directly in the moment influenced and changed what was happening in the ring.
It's one of the few things that professional wrestling can do that other art forms cannot. Between that and living at the same time that we live, meaning that, like, professional wrestling happens in the real world in a way that other art doesn't. When you see me perform in the ring, and let's say a month has passed, and the next time that you see me perform, 30 days have passed for Ophidian the Cobra, in the same way 30 days has passed for Matt Storm. There is no other art form that follows that trajectory, that lives in the same world as we do. Granted, there are a few exceptions to that sometimes with certain characters. But for the most part, we live and grow in the same rate anybody else lives and grows, as far as the character side of things go.
The next thing I wanted to ask, actually, because I'm always fascinated about people within an art form when they consume an art form. So for you, watching wrestling, like something like Glow, which is a TV show based on actual wrestling, watching actual current wrestling, or playing a wrestling video game, do any of those things, like, can you do those things, or are you so critical or so passionate about what you do in the physical space that you can't enjoy those things?
I'll start off with video games first and foremost, man. I love gaming, but when I game, I want to live in an I want an escapist experience. I
Right.
want to live in another world. So, and professional wrestling video games don't really provide me that. And I am either. I say that probably because I'm really bad at wrestling video games. I'm great at video games, but bad at wrestling video games. And I don't like the WWE games. Not to say there aren't good wrestling. I like more arcade, over-the-top style
Sure.
wrestling games. But as far as entertainment goes, I still love professional wrestling. And I think if I couldn't watch professional wrestling through the eyes of a fan anymore, then I don't know if I could still continue wrestling. I think being able to consume it and in the same way that I consumed it when I was younger, when I really loved wrestling and what was being presented didn't matter, in the grand scheme of things, right? I would consume it regardless of whether it was good or bad. I was just happy to have it a part of my life. And I think I still am in that mindset now. I haven't lost that feeling yet. And I would be afraid if I did. And I think that goes true even for other like Glow or even movies like The Wrestler, right? And things like that that kind of give you an alternate take, in another art form of what we do. I can look at that stuff and hopefully enjoy it for what it is just another version of what it is we do, like another way to tell the same stories that I've been watching and telling through, over years.
See, that's always fascinating to me because I like, you assume if musicians still listen to music, wrestlers would watch wrestling and so on and so forth, but it's not always that way in every art form. And so it's always really interesting to hear how people interact with that art. You mentioned that you like playing video games. What kind of things do you like to do when you're decompressing, when you're not wrestling or training for wrestling or preparing for wrestling?
I think there's one thing I want to touch base on before we move forward, which
Sure.
kind of you've reminded me of, is that because professional wrestling is a partnered art form, right? Like I absolutely cannot in any way make professional wrestling by myself. There must be an opponent across the ring. Even if that opponent is the Invisible Man,
Right.
there's still an opponent across the ring for me that I'm working with, right? And not even just that, like a referee and this commentary, right? There's an entire production that needs to happen in order for wrestling to happen. And I think a lot of professional wrestlers still watch as much wrestling as they perform because we're still seeking out other performers that we would like to create art with. Whereas like with music, you can be a musician and work by yourself entirely, right? Acting, I mean, you can kind of work with just small grouping of people and never work with anybody else. Like you can kind of stay insular. But with pro wrestling, that doesn't work that way, right? You need that you need a constant changeover in performers in order to keep the wrestling what it is, right? To keep it alive and vibrant and to keep it fresh and new. You cannot, wrestle the same guy every single day for your entire career. Nobody would watch it, long term. And I think that's another thing that is part of the professional wrestling industry that outside of like circus arts and stuff like that, like partnered circus arts, that you don't really get. Anything else. Yeah.
No, yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't even thought of that, but that does make sense. I mean, it's competitive. It's like any other competitive sport or, sport adjacent thing is like if it's competitive, you need someone else. No one wants to watch a hockey team play by themselves. They want to watch them play another hockey team.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's really fascinating. So I hadn't thought of that, but that it makes perfect sense. But going back to the downtime, I know when I ask a lot of artists what they do in their downtime, a lot of them are like nothing because I'm so busy making art. Do you get downtime? Do you get to play some video games or watch some movies, things like that?
Oh yeah, no doubt. I think it's important to constantly consume other art forms that are outside of your own in order to keep your mind fresh for the art that you're making, because you will grow stagnant. You will kind of have that writer's block if you aren't consuming other media that is outside of your, outside of the tried and true stuff that you're used to consuming. If you don't allow your brain to eat a little bit of junk food every once in a while, right, to kind of like veg out, I guess for the lack of a better term at the moment, you aren't going to have a fresh idea pop up, right? It's like if you don't get some sleep, your brain's not going to function the same way. And if you don't pull yourself out of the art that you create and allow your brain to breathe and not have to focus on work so much, you're gonna get lost in it and stuck. So I absolutely believe it's of the utmost necessary to create and consume outside of pro wrestling. So gaming, always. I'm currently living in the world of Mortal Kombat.
Nice.
It came out the other day. And Mortal Kombat's a huge influence on wrestling for me as well. Mortal Kombat, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, these guys have definitely influenced some of the things that I say and do in the ring. I've got Mortal Kombat tattoos on my body. And that's a world that I enjoy pulling from, stealing from. And of course Destiny as well. But I'm a massive horror fan. And just love, cinema in general. I went to college for video imaging. So some of my background is in that. Being able to consume any film, I don't care what it is. I love all media. When it comes all types of media, all genres. I'm sorry, of that media, and but specifically horror and like exploitation from 70s and early 80s.
Do you have an absolutely number one favorite horror film?
The Hellraiser franchise is without a doubt, I think,
Nice.
my favorite horror movies. Pinhead, I think, is a great. The Cenobites in general are just great villains. I enjoy the book just as much as I enjoy the movies, for different reasons. I think that the movies do it well, even if they don't really stay true to the book. I do think the movies do it well and create something. Clive Barker's created something with the original Hellraiser movie that did not exist in horror before he made it. And it hasn't been done well since.
Yeah, my issue with a lot, so I'm not really a horror fan. I'm kind of a coward. I've started to come back to it because some more recent movies have been less about the jump scare. Like, I've seen both of Jordan Peele's horror movies, which I actually really enjoyed, even though they still terrified the crap out of me. But I find like the older stuff was really great at building suspense and then having a payoff, whereas the stuff in the 2000s, like all of the torture porn and some of the other stuff that came out around that time, or even the newer versions of old horror movies, were all about like jump scares and the grotesque and not about curating a mood or an environment, which I feel like is what really good horror does.
Yeah. I think part of that was especially since at that time period, a lot of those movies didn't have the budget or the backing, socially, to do what they wanted to do. They had to be creative in ways that we don't need to be creative anymore in those mediums. So, horror working on a shoestring budget and having nobody back them. It's just a bunch of friends going, we can make whatever we want. We're limited in how we make it, but there's no studio to answer to. There's no higher up to say we can't do this. We can do this how we want in whatever way we want. Created a genre of entertainment, the exploitation films that were above and beyond what anybody would have ever expected, especially if you look back at them now and kind of see what they created back then.
Yeah, totally. By the way, I just want to say, for consistency's sake, I'm so glad that your neighbor's dog is barking, because Kate and I, when I interviewed her for the podcast, had the same problem. So, it keeps us all in universe, in the Kate Ophidian universe, that dog is barking.
He barks more when we're in this room.
Oh, okay.
When we record in the back sewing room, and I know it's what it is. We come back here, and he has to be able to hear our voices, and he wants in on the conversation.
Right, of course. He just wants to be heard. I mean, that's really it. I've really loved chatting with you, Ophidian. I love I've struggled to get back into wrestling, and I really want to. And I've talked to some people that they're just like, just jump in, watch it, and you'll get back into it. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit before we wrap up about, and it's a bit of a cheesy question, but I like asking artists this question. Like, if there are people listening who are interested in wrestling or have wanted to check out either wrestling on TV or the stuff that you do or get involved and be a part of wrestling, like, what would you say is a great entry point for people, either if they want to learn and train or if they just want to watch?
So I'll start with the watching part. We often forget that, like with music, right? There are all different types of genres and there's subgenres within that. So while you may not, be a fan of the main genre of something, you might like a subgenre that is intertwined with another genre of music you like, right?
Right.
There are always alternatives to an alternative take on on a specific genre or form of entertainment, and the same is true for professional wrestling. You can watch WWE, the tried and true form of professional wrestling that has existed for generations at this point. That is kind of the most consumable to a mainstream audience. Or you can start looking at the subgenres of professional wrestling and go specifically in the direction of high flyers. If all you want to see are people doing crazy acrobatic feats that looks like it's something right out of a circus, then you can watch, Lucha Libre. You can watch some of this, exciting, over-the-top stuff. If you're a hardcore horror fan and love gore, you can watch death matches, right? You can watch dudes getting power bombed through glass tables and light tubes and getting, their skin caught on barbed wire and ripped out during a match. If you like comedy, right, and just want to see people kind of being silly and having fun, there are companies that just do straight comedy wrestling. One of my favorites is Old Time Wrestling, which is based out of Ohio, and they film everything in black and white, and all the performers are out of like a 1920, like they're all vaudeville style performance. It's wonderful to watch. Or if you like comic book stuff, you can watch something like Chikara, which is a comic book come to life, which is where I'm from. We're all characters with superpowers, or we're doing crazy acrobatic stuff mixed with comic book style storylines and lore. There is a little bit of something for everybody, and I would truly recommend just searching for any of the stuff. Start with something that you'll enjoy. If you like high flying, you like comic books, you like gore, right? There's gonna be a subgenre of pro wrestling that you might be able to get into. I'm not saying it's gonna be for you specifically, but you might be able to get into it. As far as professional wrestling goes, training, as far as getting into the industry, it takes all shapes and sizes to get into professional wrestling. Like, we need them all. Good professional wrestling, has tall with the short, has, large with the skinny, has male, has female, has all the genders involved, all the shapes, all sizes, all races involved in it. Because then we're able to tell stories we aren't able to tell otherwise. We need a little bit of everything. If you think if you're to this or to that for professional wrestling, it's probably just you that feels that way. There's going to be a school that is going to disagree with you and say, no, we need your type of person in our environment, or, in our company, in order to tell these kinds of stories. Like right now, Chikara is kind of being touted as crowning the first non-binary champion in professional wrestling.
Awesome.
With Still Life with Apricots and Pears, who's very open about, open publicly about being non-binary and identifies as they, them, which is not something that you get from pro wrestling very often. It's not an art form that is really up with the times when it comes to, social justices and things of that nature. That's really awesome. Find the right, obviously, find the right facility that kind of fits your ideology. It exists, I promise you, it's out there. Professional wrestling training is difficult. It is hard to become an actual in-ring performer. It's very damaging to the body. It's extremely taxing. A lot of performers, while you can have a longer career back in the day, the performance style, the rate that it's moving at now, doesn't really, agree with tenured careers. It's difficult. But if you're able to physically handle it and mentally handle it as well, I'd say give it a shot. The Wrestle Factory, which is where I teach at in South Philadelphia, along with Mike Quackenbush and Hollowick and Fire and other performers that travel around the world. We're all world travel trainers, performers that train out of a school in Philadelphia. And there's also other good schools around the country and other schools that I've taught at around the world that I would recommend if anybody would ever hit me up and ask. I've performed in 16 countries, taught in about 14 of them. I've been all over the place and seen a lot of professional wrestling, and there's a little bit of everything out there for everybody.
That's awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I'd love for you to tell my listeners where they can find you on the internet, where they can see you perform. This episode will air in about 4 weeks, so stuff coming up over the next couple of months, anything that you want the listener to know about.
I'm just going to look up real quick what 4 weeks out is. That'll be right after Anniversario, so that'll be okay. So first and foremost, you can find me. Let me help you out here. Me, the venomous and vile serpent of the Nile, the one and only master of snake style, the Cobra, Supernova, Ophidian, on Twitter, at Ophidian Cobra, or on Instagram, at Ophidian Cobra, or, pretty much anywhere, at Ophidian Cobra. You can also follow the company that my wife and I run, Closet Champion, at Closet Champion, across all social media, and at our Patreon if you'd like to support and get some behind the scenes stuff on training, on the video content that we make, as well as some of the sewing stuff that we some of the sewing costumes that we make for the wrestling industry, you can join us at patreon.com/closetchampion. If you're interested in checking me out live performing, I'll be at it's a charity show in Philadelphia on June 7th. I think 4 weeks out. June 7th will be at, give me 1 second here. I have to pull that up.
No worries.
This just got added to my schedule. Great. Friday, June 7th at Love City Brewing as part of Philly Beer Weekend Pride 2019. You can also catch me at Vans Warped Tour in Atlantic City on the 29th and 30th of June with GCW, as I'll be performing throughout the weekend with them. They've got 4 sets there. Or if you're in the Baltimore area, you can catch me at the Flying V Theater, and I'll be there on July 12th. That'll also be streaming live on Independent Wrestling .tv, IWTV.
Nice.
And beyond that, by the end of summer, I'll be in Europe touring again throughout the UK and the Scandinavian countries and Spain, Portugal, many, many, many places.
Amazing. Ophidian, this has been a pleasure. Again, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. The last thing I will request of you is we have a saying on this podcast, which is music is life and life is good. The idea that if you're enjoying art, your life is going to be good. So can you sign us off in your own Ophidian way with music is life and life is good?
Wrestling is life. And brother, life is good. Oh, yeah, yes.
That's it for this episode of Crash Chords Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and Facebook. You'll help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email matt.storm@crashchords.com or hit us up on Twitter at CrashChordsWeb. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Victor Devon, and I am the host of We Burlesque, the podcast. Every Monday, I talk to fabulous denizens of nightlife, including burlesque performers, both seasoned and new to the form, drag performers, performance artists, DJs, and artists who make up their respective scenes. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Please visit WeBurlesque.com to check out episode recaps and see all the formats available. And remember that music is life. Life is good.